We now have just 20 general weekend tickets left for the Freedom event of the year. That's Renegade University at Texas, October 8th to the 10th. It'll be in Lockhart, which is the barbecue capital of the Longhorn State. It has many world-famous barbecue joints, which we'll be frequenting throughout the weekend. So the reason people are snapping up tickets is mostly because of the all-star lineup, though. We will have at this event Scott Horton, Cody Wilson, Hotep Jesus, Jack the Perfume Nationalist, and Deirdre McCluskey, joining me and Buck Johnson, along with our sponsor, Paloma Verde CBD, for a whole weekend of interviews, podcast recordings, hanging out, playing around in Lockhart together. This is going to be an unbelievable event. Go to renegadeuniversity.com/Texas to get more information and to buy your tickets now. I can't wait to see you there. Thank you. Thanks to ZocDoc for supporting Unregistered. With ZocDoc, you can search for local doctors who accept your insurance, read verified patient reviews, and book an appointment, either in person or by video chat. Go to ZocDoc.com/renegade and download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free and book a top-rated doctor. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. My guest this week made what I consider to be the best documentary film on the Russiagate hoax, but her story is entirely unregistered. Born and raised in Hollywood, she became the least likely Deputy Assistant Secretary of State there could be, which is the highest compliment I could pay anyone. This is my interview with Amanda Milius. I am joined from Washington, D.C. by Amanda Milius, someone I've been wanting to talk to for quite a while. Now, Amanda is the maker of The Plot Against the President, a documentary about Russiagate, which I think definitively debunks basically all the claims in Russiagate. And I think it's one of the best documentaries on politics I've seen in many years. And that's how I first found out about you. Although actually, no, I first saw you on War Room. Listeners to this show are tired of me talking about my obsession with Steve Bannon and War Room. But I did see you on there, and I thought you were very smart and very cool, especially for someone who's involved in politics, and you're just unique in the way, in who you are and where you've come and what you're doing compared to sort of your background in some ways. But there's just so much to talk about with you. And I've been following your career. I've been watching you on other shows and watching you get interviewed elsewhere. And I've just been really interested and dying to have you on. Now, that's the good stuff, Amanda. Now, the bad thing is that I'm breaking a rule here.
Okay.
We've done 181, I think, episodes so far. You are the first person on this show who's ever worked in government.
Oh, that's good, because I'm like the least likely person to have ever worked in government. So it doesn't really break the rule that much.
Right. That's why you're here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because you're like the anti-government person.
Yes.
Let's just get it out there. You know, you worked in the Trump administration, in the State Department, doing communications for the administration of the State Department, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also in the White House.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did 6 months in the White House. I was working on a project that ended up getting shelved for the second term. Unfortunately, I've very disappointed about that, but you know, I'm not in charge, so it's okay. It was a really great experience. I was doing immigration related comms, which is kind of like my specialty. So I was very
Okay.
excited to shine in that area because that was my first issue. You know, that was the first thing that got me interested in
Right.
really in like politics in this modern kind of this contemporary time.
Right. And then you have, and we'll talk a lot about that. And I want to talk about specific issues. And just so you know, like I have fundamental disagreements with you and Trump and MAGA and Steve Bannon about not everything, obviously, but several core issues, especially immigration. But I feel like you and I can talk about immigration having a fundamental difference about it, but and do it in a way that's not a shouting match, not even maybe even an argument, but I think it'll just be elucidating.
I do this all the time. Remember, I
Yeah,
come from Los Angeles. I mean, this is one of the
I
things
know.
is like the idea that like I was talking about this with somebody at a party the other day. We're about some China stuff, and I was like, blah blah blah. We got to do X, Y, and Z about China, and they were like, yeah, but you got to figure out how to talk about this to people that aren't on, you know, that haven't come to this decision
Exactly.
yet. I'm like, yeah. I know. I didn't just pop out of like right-wing, you know, conservative DC. Like I grew up in Los Angeles in the
Right.
film industry. Like I'm pretty good at talking to like the majority of my friends. Like I was the only Republican I knew for like many years
I'm
before,
sure.
besides obviously the person that I lived with. It was like, you know, my parents. So I'm not like, it's not, I think actually that helped me at State Department. You know, I mean, I'm sure it would
Oh
be
yeah.
divided if you talk to people I used to work with about whether I was like, you know, the spawn of Satan or, you know, kind of a good person. But like, I feel like I got a little bit more trust and I got a little bit more credibility than I think somebody who was more traditionally conservative or came from that background would have.
Mhm.
Like, I was working with creatives and I wanted to actually help them. Like, part of the thing at State and for right-wing people going into government is that, okay, so you've got your policy differences, fine. The other thing that we want to do is not burn money, not waste Americans' resources.
Mhm.
And if, you know, if you can't end programs that you find ridiculous, you know, end the ones that really suck if you can, and make the ones that are that ought to be there run well with private sector metrics. So you're not just burning
Mm.
invisible money, and you
Mhm.
actually are having an effect. And the weird thing is actually the working level people that do that stuff, they recognize when someone wants to make things better and they want that. And so you kind of get past the ideological stuff if it's not, you know, too big of a deal. And I think I actually found that I had a lot of support and allies because I was like, hey, I'm trying to, like, what do you guys need to do what you do faster and cheaper and not spend 1.5 months making a 2-minute video? Like, there's no way that you enjoy doing that. And they're like, no, we don't, please help. And so like there was actually a lot of I think the majority of the time, I mean, the people that I worked with, I think they liked me. I mean, I think we were okay.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, you are this remarkable bridge between Trump world and liberal America, because as you said, you grew up not just in LA, you grew up in Hollywood and you grew
Yeah.
up around those people. You grew up around Hollywood liberals and leftists, right? Not your family, which is the next thing we'll talk about. But so, you know, I hate to talk too much about this because I want you to be here for yourself, but your father is a very famous person in Hollywood, John Milius.
Yeah.
And
No, that's fine.
many people watching or listening just gasped, I'm sure, because I'm sure they're massive fans of his. And he is, I just want to state this in public. He is the writer of what I believe to be the greatest film ever made, which is Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
And in fact, my dream is to one day make some kind of version of Apocalypse Now, because I just think it's certainly the finest war movie, and I consider it an anti-war movie. I think it's the finest anti-war movie at all as well.
This is frequently discussed. I mean,
Yeah.
my whole life I get people asking me, you know, do you or your dad think that the movie is an anti-war movie, a pro-war movie? And the thing that my dad said, either he said it or a friend of his said it, I want to like misquote it, but this was the answer that I thought was the best, which is he was like, it's an anti-war movie like Goodfellas is an anti-gangster movie.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I would put it too. That's right. It's not propagandistic. It's not explicit. It's not on the nose in its anti-war position. It's not even 100% clear that it is anti-war. That your
Yeah, like
dad.
I don't personally think it's exactly anti-war,
Right.
but it sums up weirdly. Now that you mention it, I feel like it really has kind of informed my personal views in a lot of ways because um, my dad is very pro-defense, but he
Mm-hmm.
was also he almost had this sort of Trumpian take on the neocons pre-Trump. So I've sort of always grown up with this. Like he was never fond of the bow tie Republicans.
Right.
So I feel like it revels in the horrific chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think that I think what it says to me, it doesn't make a moral stance. It doesn't take a moral stance because I think that its argument is that it's beyond morality. Like when you're when they go past the bridge
Mm-hmm.
and no one's in charge and it's this horrific nightmare of psychedelic just violence everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's where we are historically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of this like muddy, I mean, the fact that there's no clear cut morality of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and by the time you get to the end of the river, like that's where we are. So when it took me a long time to get there, like my dad would say things like, he'd be like, he called himself a Zen anarchist.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I was like, oh, he's just stringing outrageous words together to mess with people. I don't know what that means. And then now I've come so far that I have to respect that. I'm like, no, he's right. I'm like, that's it. That's how I have to survive in this world to even be okay with the daily news. I'm like, I am a Zen anarchist. Like that's like, I have no better words to put it. Like, I think he was right.
Yeah, I am trying every day to be a Zen anarchist. I think that is the best way to be. I wish I could become a Zen anarchist like your dad, but
We all do.
it is the greatest antidote, or it's the only antidote. So that's quite a lineage, quite a background, quite a context you bring to working with and around the Trump campaign and the Trump movement and the MAGA movement, right? I mean, you've got to be unique in that world, I would think.
I mean, yeah, sort of. I mean, when I started, like I'd been working in movies. I mean, I've said this before. I won't go through the whole thing again, but I had just gone to USC. I was doing movies. I had like a religious experience basically. And there's a reason I use that to describe it, but I drove out to Vegas to volunteer for the campaign because I couldn't talk about politics in LA. I had this feeling that I should just be myself and say whatever I thought. And I suspected that was the way to go, but I wasn't really there yet. And it was too scary. And I didn't want to be at odds with my friends. And so I ran out to Vegas to kind of have this secret place where I could volunteer for the thing that I cared about, which was the Trump campaign. I could be myself, and not like nobody I was a film student. Like, who cares what I do? But people didn't know that I worked anywhere near Hollywood. I was just a normal person that could volunteer and hang out with all of these very normal people who were nice families that weren't neurotic, insane people like the people were in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I had this it was like the happiest I've ever been in my life. It's like waking up every day to go, paste signs together and knock doors with families and teach people how to use the app on the phone and answer people's questions when they came in the door and give them bumper stickers. And like, it was like the best moment of my life. And, as I've said other times, I'm not saying no one should ever make politics their religion. And I have a religion, I'm fairly religious, but there's a unique, any human happiness program will tell you that that's the way to go, to have a purpose that you're doing and to kind of level the playing field, and not this Hollywood thing where you're like, I'm a special person and I have to be the most special person and watch me succeed at my specialness. That's how you become miserable and crazy. And so I think there's a reason why that worked for me. So when I started with Trump World, I mean, I wasn't saying like, oh, I'm from Hollywood. Like, weirdly, a lot of people think that my dad got me my job at the State Department, which is hilarious because you're like, I don't think anybody would give anybody related to him a security clearance on purpose. Like like John Milius calls like State Department the most diplomatic place, and he's like, I have a daughter that's really similar to me. Will you hire her? Like, that's not how that happened.
No.
Like, So I was kind of on my own trajectory and had really left film behind and Hollywood and everything that comes with it behind. I was on this thing where I was just myself, and I happened to work with some of the best people. And you know, I got to DC and I was told pretty clearly when I got here, and everybody was kind of searching for jobs, right? It was during the transition. I was working on the inaugural committee, and I'd never really been to DC before. And everybody on the Hill was like, all the Republican staffers were like, oh shit, we won. Like, we get to work in the government now. We've been waiting. We've gone to school for this. We've been waiting for this our whole lives. And lo and behold, all these little RNC kids, they didn't know anybody in the administration. They didn't know any of these people because this was an outsider group.
That's right.
So I found myself, knowing like 5 out of 10 of the people that were doing the hiring. And I had a conversation with another volunteer friend who was here, who was, you know, had worked on the Hill. And he's like, this town is going to hate this administration. And I was like, why? And he was like, because you have a list of 5 people you can call to get a job. And he did, but he's like, people I've been working with for 12 years are not going to like that they don't. And that was the clearest message of like, the establishment is not happy about this. And so, yeah, so that's how I got in the administration, is I apparently did a good job organizing something on the campaign. And
so, yeah, you're on a mission. I mean, watching you in recent months, doing media, talking, it's been clear to me that you're fully invested in this. You know, this is your life now. And it wasn't always, right? You're part of a social movement, a very large social movement that is on the verge, or has the chance, very real chance, to take over the government of the United States of America, and to really, for better or worse, and to change, to take it over again, I suppose. And to
so where I'm sitting, that looks really unlikely. It looks like I'm part of a movement that's got a really good chance of getting locked in a gulag and put away forever. But sure, I like your outlook better.
Well, I mean, both are happening, but I mean, it's a very large movement with tens of millions of people who are committed to it as well. You know, socialists can't say that. You know, fascists can't say that. The MAGA movement is a very large movement, and the only reason people don't know about it is that it's completely ignored in the mainstream media. So it has its own, it's created its own media outlets. You know, the War Room is just one, but there are many that cover it, that push it forward, that are, and I think that's why I love watching War Room. I'm watching, even though I disagree with on them on so many issues, it's watching the social movement kind of emerge and grow and become so dynamic. And it's changing history too. It's changing American history. And it's certainly on the verge. I think it could change history in a very important way, many important ways.
And you're right about the numbers with it. I mean, it is ignored by the mainstream media. Yeah. And then you look at things like War Room, which their numbers are insane. The viewership is insane. Even in my case with the movie, like I said,
right.
Mainstream Hollywood is not, you know, Vanity Fair is not knocking down my door to celebrate the female documentarian that broke all the records. Like, that's not happening. So most, like, you know, people in LA, I was just there, like, they don't even know about it, and that's fine. You know, I'll tell them personally. But it had, you know, it has more reviews than any other documentary on Amazon. I mean,
wow,
that's insane. Like, so it's this, and it's similar to that feeling I got when I was volunteering in 2016. There were these people of all different walks of life that were coming out, and they didn't know why, but they were like, I want to spend my one day off here at the Trump for headquarters. You know, there's not even a special guest visiting that day, but they wanted to be around each other. And it was, I mean, I would be talking to these women that didn't get involved. I mean, like, you know, older women, like Kennedy Democrats that hadn't been involved in elections or politics at all, because that's not what they're interested in. They're raising their families. Like most people, like most Republicans, certainly, they don't like politics. They don't like the government. So why would they want to work in the government? They want to take care of their families, their entrepreneurs, whatever. And it was so clear that there was this overwhelming calling. And you can argue plenty of, you know, was this the perfect messenger? And I'm not going to try to convince everybody to, you know, I love the president. I love Trump. I think he's amazing. I think he's hilarious. I just adore him. But I'm not going to try, I have plenty of people who agree on certain parts of the movement, but are like, okay, well, that was an imperfect messenger. But I'm like, I don't care. It's not about that. It's about those people that I was working with.
Yeah.
Like, that's who this is about.
So I've heard you talk about this elsewhere, but how big is the movie? How many people have watched it? Do you give us a sense? Do you have numbers?
I'm not on top of it today because I've been like running around all over the place. But like, for example, so Amazon is hard to get metrics with because they don't, also, again, other movies don't publish their metrics on purpose. And I know why they do that. I mean, there's a very specific reason why it's very hard to get accurate budgets and accurate, unless there's a box office, which 2020, there was virtually no movies that depended entirely on box offices because most theaters were closed. That helped us because we intended a very small, limited theatrical run anyway. Like, the point was not to be in theaters. A lot of conservative other filmmakers, their business model is built on the theatrical model. And even before COVID happened, as we were producing the movie, we already were like, no, we're streaming mainly. We'll play in a couple small towns in America and that's it. And that really helped us. So numbers wise, okay, so the last time I checked, it had over 15,000 reviews, which you multiply that by, so not most people don't leave reviews, right? And in Amazon, you have to have actually purchased the movie to even pretend to leave a review. So even the people that are review bombing it, whatever. So you kind of got to take from that what you will. But for example, The Godfather has 7,000. Now, I am not claiming that this movie has been seen more than that or that means anything at all. I'm just trying to say metrics wise, and then we've got iTunes, we've got DVDs, it's sold in Walmart and Target. We're about to do a deal with Salem. Like it's I think, and the foreign hasn't even come out yet. So, I mean, we're about to sell in every single territory in the world. And weirdly, we have this huge hunger for it in Japan, India, and obviously Brazil. And Israel, but we're going to do it, it's going to be everywhere. So it's hard to give you an exact one because like I would have had to have sat down and looked at our current numbers, but millions of people have seen it.
Wasn't it number one on Amazon for a while?
For a very long time, and which is hilarious because Amazon didn't really want it there. And it was a real I have to be a little bit proud of myself because I anticipated how to do that and it worked. It'll never work again. It's a one-trick pony because Amazon literally changed their rules after our movie came out where they will no longer accept unsolicited documentaries. You have to have had, a meeting with Amazon. They have to have acquired your movie ahead of time or been part of producing it, which is more of the Netflix model. So Netflix doesn't take, that Netflix only does their thing, right? You can't just put your movie out on Netflix through a distributor or through a aggregator. There has to be a deal made and it's exclusive, which means it can't be anywhere else. There's a reason that I did it the way I did it, which is I knew we'd get canceled somewhere. We actually didn't. And that, I talk about this as well, which is I went to film school. I majored in producing, basically. I worked at production companies. I do believe there is a lot of censorship of controversial and conservative content. But for that reason, the same reason I say what I did about credibility is we have to be perfect. And so that movie is so legally shored up. I spent probably as much money on lawyers as I did on production.
Oh my God.
That there is no document, no insurance, there is nothing even a little bit shaky. Like that movie is like solid and it is. And so when Amazon looks at it, they're like, we got to find some reason to say no to this. It's very hard. And I tell this to other conservative filmmakers and to people, it's not the fun part of movie making. Like, did I enjoy talking to lawyers for half of my day, every day that I was doing post on that movie? Not really. Like, did I enjoy watching that much money that could have gone on screen go out the door to like 10 or 15 different lawyers? No, but boy, do I love them now. And like, it was worth it. So
it's so solid and it's so clear. And it also, I think one of the remarkable accomplishments is that it doesn't really read as a partisan film either.
That was a big goal of mine. And I think, like you said, I hope that I'm in the right position to do that each time. because even though I'm fairly partisan, like I'm a total, obviously I'm like a right-wing nut job, fine. But I mean, really, I arrived at my opinions, I think, through a logical and a thoughtful process. And so I feel like I'm in a good position to make those arguments, and people can take it or leave it, but I didn't want to be that movie is so about hard, cold facts that there's no reason to be what's the word? Overly partisan or it's
propagandistic or even explicit.
Exactly.
Like I mean, so there's no voiceover narration, right? There's not that trick that documentary filmmakers use to sort of steer the viewer to the right conclusion about what they're watching.
I don't like that.
No, you just lay it out there, and it's almost all interviews, or maybe it's all interviews with other people.
All interviews.
Just other people talking, and it's dozens of people talking about their experiences and what they know and what they saw.
But the other reason I think I was struck to make that movie is because these were first person narratives, right? Like when you talk about journalism school, I'm not a journalist, I will never be a journalist. But when you talk about this stuff, I remember you're always told, the best source is the closest source to the thing that happened. So you've got these other people like, Showtime or whoever making movies about Russiagate, and they have never even talked to anyone that was in the room. Meanwhile, I am interviewing the staffer whose back was against the wall during the McCabe meeting with Michael Flynn. I'm talking to the people that were working, and that's what the benefit of being in the administration was, is I know all this stuff. Like I know when KT McFarland, the moment she walks out of the room with Michael Flynn and she's describing, I got to my office, I closed the door behind me and I put my back against the door, and I realized that these transcripts had been leaked and that they would have had to have been leaked from the highest possible sources. Like her alone in an office in the White House at night, like that's some cinema. Like I'm like, it's so obvious to me. And I also think that was because to me, it was vibrant because I never set out to make documentaries. Like I skipped documentary class at USC pretty much. Like, I mean, I had to do like one or two, but like, I was not super into docs. Like I was very much doing, the most directing classes that I could do as far as directing actors. I worked with the best directing coach that they have, who, by the way, is a super, super Democrat liberal. Like he teaches a class. He's an amazing man. His name's Jeremy Kagan. I hope he's not embarrassed that I say that I love him, because he's like the Yoda of USC directing. I mean, it's like it's close to a religious experience learning how to direct from this man. Wow. And I have so much respect for him. And he teaches the social justice class at USC now, which I did not pick. But so what I'm saying is I hope at least that I came at directing with actually a much more narrative style and like a more like poetic visual narrative style, instead of what I find so awful about a lot of documentaries. I mean, documentaries have taken leaps and bounds in the last 2 years. They're quite good now, but like they're like homework assignments a lot of the time. There's no emotion. There's no like, I don't really, I like the documents. Yeah, they're great. Like it proves a lot, but like those stories, like what KT told me, or what, any of these people, Nunes describing the moment that these two guys came and told him what was happening. And the moment, I mean, there's comedic moments, like when he's talking about the moment that he first read the dossier. And if you've spent as much time around Devin as I have, you have to understand he's everybody's dad, right? Like what he really wants to be doing is talking about his grill and check out, this corn and the really amazing steak. And like, I mean, like, and you're like, dude, all the secrets of the country. Like, you're like the most like, like, I don't want to hear about the steak. Like, tell me about the things. And so he's talking, I mean, you've got this guy and if you know him, he's describing reading this salacious document and his face. And he's like, and I never heard this about anybody. And you're like, it's just this, like, these characters are so vibrant. They're so amazing that I'm like, how could you not make this into an interesting
the hookers the hookers in the golden shower in a Russian hotel was a little too much for Devin Nunes, who's apparently
a lot for him. Yeah,
it's a lot for him. It's a true conservative man, right? In every way. Yeah,
Yeah,
too
and
much.
that was the other thing that was important is, I mean, look, Devin, he wasn't a MAGA guy. He's not, I love the MAGA guys, obviously, like these are my people, but he wasn't like a Matt Gaetz who
No,
came in with the Trump crowd.
no.
He was a very straight-laced, foreign policy focused,
Yeah,
fairly hawkish, very
very
hawkish,
hawkish. Yep.
conservative guy who just actually had honor and told the truth.
It's amazing. How weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have had nothing good to say about Devin Nunes because I disagreed with him profoundly on foreign policy and other things. But yeah, I thought he was just obviously right about this. Russiagate. I mean, so let's talk about this. So first of all, whose idea was it to do the movie? Was it your idea or did it come from within the administration?
No, it certainly didn't come from within the administration, but I had a group of friends that were both in and out of the admin. Lee Smith, the author of the book, who was, for years prior to releasing the book, doing this investigation. And he was one of the first and only journalists, in addition to John Solomon, people like Matt Taibbi, for example, who I wish we had in the movie, but we'd been talking. It didn't work out at that time, but I love him. People like that who were telling the truth and who were looking at this and going, this doesn't make sense. And I'm going to follow this thread. And Lee Smith had been doing this, the real work of this, obviously. And he is friends with, and obviously had been interviewing people like Kash Patel at the time. I knew Kash on the periphery, like we weren't that good of friends. Like we kind of knew each other in circles, along with a handful of other people that were, had been in the administration, but then had at that point been out. And it's just a bunch of individuals. I mean, we were all just kind of like, like work friends, talking about all this crazy stuff. I mean, a lot of people in the lower working level, and myself included, I mean, there's nobody in the administration that didn't in some way, I don't want to say suffer because that's overuse. That's not true, but vibe with me for a second, but suffered from the fact that Russiagate was a narrative that everyone we worked with believed. I had to go to work and people at State Department, I was, making an argument to do, whatever, we needed to do a communications piece about XYZ. And they were like, always looking at it with a sideways glance where it's like, well, are they doing this because they're working for Putin? And you're like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Can you guys just get your head on? Like the national security apparatus, remember, because not just normal Americans watching CNN believe this. These people that run the State Department, that run DOD, that run all of these agencies, the FBI, DOJ, they go home and watch CNN as well. Yep. So they're going into work every day going, oh, the president's a Russian agent. All his political appointees are compromised. How can you work like that? I mean, it's insane. So there was a lot of discussion, naturally in that vein. So to get to your point of how it came about, a friend of mine knew Lee better than I did. I mean, we'd all been at dinners and whatnot. And he was like, hey, didn't you used to make movies? Lee Smith is putting this book out and it's the correct version of events. This is the guy who's been working, he tracked down the right people in all the different offices and he got the story correct. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't think anyone would ever do that. I thought we would go down and this would just be this nightmare thing that we'd all have to argue personally forever. And so I was like, I want to see it. And I also said, I don't make movies anymore. Like I purposefully threw a grenade into my career when I went to work for the Trump administration. I was like, let me explain how this works. There's not a lot of movie funders that are going to want to talk to me ever again. And right. I was wrong about that. But, and I said, I don't really do that anymore. Like I thought what I was doing in the government was very important, which is hilarious because, I think it was better that I did the movie, but that's basically what was said is I met with Lee. We passed around a printed copy of the manuscript before it came out. No PDFs, literally someone driving by my house. I ran out, got the manuscript, looked at it for a weekend and then gave it back. And I was like, yeah, we got to do this. And so then I just got on the phone, obviously no money could change hands until I resigned. So what I did is I got on the phone, I called an ex-agent of my dad's and I was like, hey, by the way, I graduated. By the way, I left and I joined the Trump administration. By the way, I want to resign and make a movie. Can you, who do you know? Can you get me, I need like 3 entertainment lawyers and a whatever. And so like, I got the process starting with phone calls, and then I resigned, and within a week opened the company and started started running around and actually doing it.
Just like many of you, I'm sure, I avoided going to the doctor during the lockdown. But now that everything's opening back up, it's time to catch up on our regular healthcare. So, just download the free ZocDoc app, which I think is by far the easiest way to find a great doctor, and instantly book an appointment. With ZocDoc, you can search for local doctors who take your insurance, read verified patient reviews, and book an appointment, in person or by video chat. Never wait on hold with a receptionist again. Whether you need a primary care physician, dentist, dermatologist, psychiatrist, eye doctor, or any other specialist, ZocDoc has you covered. Go to ZocDoc.com/renegade and download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free. Every month, millions of people use ZocDoc. If you have used ZocDoc, and I'm one of them, it's my go-to whenever I need to see a doctor. ZocDoc makes healthcare easy. So again, now is the time to prioritize your health. Go to ZocDoc.com/renegade and download the ZocDoc app to sign up for free and book a top-rated doctor. Many are available as soon as today. That's ZocDoc.com/renegade. Yeah. So I was curious. I love your discussion about, I guess you were talking about permanent staffers in the State Department who would go home and watch CNN and assume you guys were working for Putin. Is that who you're talking about?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like the deep state, I guess is what they would be called.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I'd love to hear. So when did you start? You started working in 2016. Is that right?
Yeah. No, 2017.
17.
January 20. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Right after it.
I was on the beachhead, but I didn't come in the building until April. So most of the people that started on the beachhead came in the building in January. To be fair, I didn't come in until April because I waited for my permanent clearance. A lot of people took whatever they're called, the interim clearances. I would have had to, like I said, move from Los Angeles to DC. And I was like, I'm not doing that for 120 days. Like, I need to know that this is for real. Call me when this clearance is 100% real and my job is complete and everything else. And so I jumped in. So
what was it like? You described this a little bit, but I'd like to hear more. Like, what was it like working in that administration during Russiagate? So every day you would get, the whole media would just be awash in these stories with unnamed sources as the only source. Saying what you just said, that you and everybody working in the administration were directly working for Vladimir Putin and Moscow. What was just the day to day? Like, what did it feel like? What did it feel like to you?
I know other people have said this before because it's kind of the common joke of the Trump administration, but having come from that campaign, and I love that campaign, and the 26 campaign was perfect because we knew the bad guys were on the outside. We were all on the same team. It was beautiful. That was not the case in 2020. But however, the idea that it was coordinating with anyone is remarkable. Like,
or just coordinating.
Yeah, right. Like in Nevada, like we were surprised by things the RNC office was doing down the street. Like, it was like, oh, you're covering that? Oh, okay, shit. All right, well, we'll go. Like, we couldn't coordinate. I mean, look, I was not very high, like in the campaign. I was doing my little thing. Like, I'm not pretending I was like in New York, but like, why anyways, it was just funny to me because I was like, it's always that thing. You always think the enemy is really coordinated. I mean, we do this too. And I learned in government, and it's a shame that we do all think of each other as enemies at this point. You try to bridge that a little bit, but like the idea that they were this sort of like, and I mean, I talked to some people about this where I was like, what do you think that I want to do with the foreign messaging of the United States? Do you imagine that if you don't fight me tooth and nail on everything, I'm going to broadcast Rush Limbaugh in every language and that, like, that's what I want to do? Like, do you really think that that's what's happening here? That we're turning the voice of the United States into like a Southern pastor that's
Well,
gonna like what do you guys think is gonna happen? It was like this massive fear. And I get it. And I think it took a minute for people to just be like, okay, well, at least, individuals have to meet each other. And then people start to trust individuals. And I think, I helped that in some ways. I probably hurt it a lot in others, because when I got into it with people, I really got into it. But usually I was defending at least some of the careers that worked for me or were in my little area. But yeah, I mean, it was really, I stupidly thought it was funny at first. Okay. So when the inaugural committee happened, the Russiagate story was just sort of bubbling really to the surface. And we were planning the inauguration, and it's a bunch of kids. It's a lot of RNC kids. It's kids from the campaign, and people are running. It's party planning. That's why they put me in that job. I wasn't like experienced in politics. It's not like they're going to put me at the transition. It was like, here, you're from Hollywood. You can plan a party, like go work for the inauguration. I was like, fine, I can do that. But like we were joking, because I was like, can you believe that they're saying this? And so like I would make horrendous jokes that after that seemed insane, because we had no idea how serious they were going to take this. But I was like, we were putting together a presentation about a carpet or a curtain that was going to be where the president was going to stand. And it was like, here's how this is going to look. And he's going to walk down the steps or whatever. We're putting down a presentation, right? Party planning. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if like we accidentally, like at first we like played a clip of like Putin's inauguration. We were like, oh, oops, how did that get in there? Like I was saying it as a joke, and we were like, haha, obviously we didn't do that. But like, that's the tone where it was like, this is so stupid that I can't believe anyone's taking this serious. Like, let's have a wank about it. Like, it's hilarious.
Yep.
And then lo and behold, once by the time we started working, by the time I was in April and whatnot, I mean, there were meetings, there were many meetings going on. And I, because of, even at my level, I was like a mid-level. When I came in, I was a senior advisor. I think it was 2 years in, they made me the DAS, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Content, which is actually a position I helped create. But anyway, but so there was mid-level things. I wasn't like needed at the highest level meetings, but I was meant to be at certain level meetings about, all the different regional issues, because my team was going to make the content for this. And I remember I came into a Russia topic meeting, and it was like the whole thing, it was like somebody let the girl with cooties come in the room, and like, she's going to see the big board. And like, it was ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous. And one of the senior people at my bureau and I didn't, there wasn't a point in arguing with people who were, at my level or below or even slightly above or whatever, because it didn't matter. I could get around them. But a senior person, I had a very large fight with in a very public way at state about the Russia thing. Ooh. And I said, we're not going to do that. They wanted to do something that I think was borderline illegal, and it was completely insane. And it was entirely fueled by the idea that the Russians were amongst us and probably working at the White House. And I was like, yeah, I've had enough of your shit. Like, this is going to stop right now, or you're like, I will take this to the top every day if I have to. It was, there was times where it got contentious. And, you start to think to yourself, like, you're like, I know this is absurd because I know these people and I know all of this. But and any normal human starts to think like, well, shit, maybe, like, I don't know everything. Like, maybe this is a thing. Like, could that be true? And then it obviously was not. But it was kind of dark,
I bet. You were ostracized in your own country.
Which I have to have my
FBI. All right, Amanda, I got to kick you off the show. We don't do that here. Sorry. No FBI. No FBI merch is allowed on screen. Do this for me, if you wouldn't mind. Can you? I want to talk about the Democratic Party. I know you care a bit about them and what they've been doing. And can you summarize what the Democratic Party did with Russiagate? Like, what did summarize the kind of the move, but in terms of what the Democratic Party actually did during those years.
I'll say, okay, so my view of the DNC has gotten quite sharpened in the last few weeks, because I'm going to go off. I'll go off top and I'll come back to that. If I could just say one thing really quickly.
Sure.
What we just witnessed with Afghanistan is something very interesting, because obviously, like, my growing theory and my disdain has always really more been with the intelligence community, because I wasn't always like a particular partisan. You know, I've got a few tinfoil hats in the closet, and I've always had a few tinfoil hats in the closet. My dad had tinfoil hats in the closet. Like, you know, I grew up learning about Waco and Ruby Ridge, and you know, we're the day after, you know, like 9/11 had a very big impact as well. And there was a lot of things. I did not like the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan. I did not like, there's no family I dislike more than the Bushes. The Obamas are close, but for someone like me, I don't see it in a partisan way, because what those two families are CIA families, like they're fourth generation CIA families.
Absolutely.
So I don't care what side of the coin they want to pretend they're running on. Like, I don't like them. I don't like their weird, creepy idea that they're going to run America in a way that it was never intended. And I mean, I love reading about the OSS and the creation of the CIA and all this stuff. It's very interesting to me. And, you know, I mean, you can see certain people who had good intentions and certain people that had bad intentions. I cannot believe we have an airport named after the Dulles. It makes me ill. But anyways, so saying that, recently when Afghanistan happened, and it was an amazing moment, and it was not taken advantage of. And I say this because this was the first moment of my lifetime where I watched the daylight between the IC run press, because that's what the press is. The press is the comms office of the IC. And I don't even say that as like a metaphor.
What's
like,
the IC?
The intelligence community.
Yeah.
And so the press is their communications shop. And normally, during the recent part of my adult life and my interest in politics, they have been in lockstep with the Democratic Party and the political leaders of that party.
Right.
Having now worked in government, I understand that there's different levels of this, right? So the IC and the career deep state, if I hate using that term, but if you will, consider themselves the custodians of the country. They lend that power to different people. Occasionally, we call them presidents. They lend that power to political groups so that they can pretend that they're in charge for a little bit of time. But if they don't do the right thing, and they either embarrass the intelligence community, or, you know, like, God forbid, someone like Donald Trump get elected on his own without their permission, you know, God help them. But what we saw in Afghanistan was a catastrophe and an embarrassment on a level that is so high. And there's one thing the IC does not like, and it's to be embarrassed in foreign affairs. They're supposed to be the masters of the universe and the chessboard movers. And to have something that sloppy and that terrible happen, look, the IC and the characters that do this crap, they don't like us. They don't like Republicans. They don't like, certainly don't like Trump people. But it's not like they, you know, the DNC party is only one step above us. They're still on top. So what we saw is this disdain coming from these institutions for the embarrassment caused by the political appointees of the Biden administration. And I saw that and I was like, holy shit. And people were like, gosh, why is CNN, like, you know, Anderson Cooper, you know, CIA agent 0010 is out here crapping on the Biden administration. Like, what's going on? And you're like, duh, what's going on is the first time in my life where the actual lines that are drawn are visible to the average person. And I was like, I know that our side, meaning the right, is so lame and so stupid and so incapable of communicating that they are going to let this moment go by. They are not going to strategically deal with this. They are not going to, I mean, I knew, and that's what happened. They literally, like McCarthy, I don't know. He just grabbed green eggs and ham and clung and hid in his office. Like, I don't know what these people were doing, but,
Oh, right.
but sorry, to get back to the DNC thing, but just so you understand
Sure.
that how I view it a little bit more than, like a particular party thing. So when the DNC did what they did in Russiagate, my going theory, you know, as I presented it in the movie, I mean, they were the perfect conduit. I mean, at that moment, they were aligned. They were aligned with the powers that be. They were aligned with they wanted the same things. They wanted Hillary in power. Both the institutional, the sort of deep institution of our country, the IC, and the Democratic Party were in lockstep. And so weaponizing intelligence is what they do. They're never going to weaponize intelligence for us. And remember, I don't mean this on, oh, it's just right, oh, it's just left. Because one of the details about the dossier is that initially it had been crafted for the Free Beacon with under the hands of McCain. So a lot of people are like, well, wait, that's Republican. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And they're like, no, that makes total sense. Like, how people don't understand that, like, the McCains, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bushes, that's all one thing. Like, that's not, that's like, they just handed the material, like, when it was no longer useful for them to have it, then they handed it to the Daily Beast. You know, obviously Fusion GPS gives it to the Daily Beast, gives it to all of the left-wing outlets that are going to do what we call the, you know, the launder process. The Washington Post and the New York Times can't put that sort of thing out themselves because it's too dirty. So then they just report on it coming out in some crap hole like the Daily Beast, which is hilarious. I say this with love. I have friends at the Daily Beast, but anyway, so I don't know if that was helpful, but that's kind of how I see it. Like, it's not like I'm sitting here going, oh, the DNC crafted this. They laundered the money. They executed it. You know, they through their law firm Perkins Coie, which is one of the most I think, I mean, people know Perkins Coie is probably the most powerful institution in our country right now. That law firm is unbelievably powerful. You know, hired Fusion GPS and laundered this fake information. You know, I don't think the DNC is going out and hanging out with Christopher Steele and knew exactly how to hire Stephen Halper and things like that. That was the intelligence community working with them. So that's those two organizations being in lockstep, and they are separate. And it was hard to say they were separate because most of my life they've been together. They've been like this until the last 2 weeks. And we got to see what happens when the IC gets disappointed in the current political.
Yeah. The reason I have had MAGA people on this show, including you, is that I believe that MAGA people are anti-establishment. And I think that's pretty clear, since the establishment for the last 5+ years has been doing everything it can to expel you from the body politic as if you were a virus, right? Now, the thing about the establishment that people really don't understand, and even most Republicans don't get this, Republicans, of course, have been part of the establishment for a long time, but the establishment in the United States was created by liberal Democrats. So the CIA, your nemesis, was created by Harry Truman. The United Nations, NATO, all the things that Trump has gone after, created by Democrats. All the big wars until Iraq were Democrat wars, as Bob Dole said.
Right, but I think I try to avoid historically signing, like allowing myself to be like, oh yeah, the Democratic Party of World War I was the Democratic Party of now. I mean, that's just not, ideologically, I mean, even, I don't even know where you would land. I mean, I try, like I said, I try really hard not to view things through the lens of, was this bad thing a Democrat bad thing, or was it a Republican bad thing? Because I would go nuts. I mean, I spent a good part of my life, like I said, like hating the Bushes every day, and yet, you know, hating Obama for certain things that he did just as much. So I think I have to be honest, right? Like with myself, and not pretend that like everything I dislike because of the party affiliation of the person that created it.
No, of course. Yeah. And of course,
the United Nations is tough for me because, you know, I'm very pro-Israel, which is actually where I now that I've only been on Twitter as myself for like, you know, 5 months, like 6 months. I don't know.
Mm.
Like I find that the place where I get into the biggest fights with what we'll call the dirtbag left is on the Israel stuff.
Israel, yeah.
It's very weird. And then also, by the way, I end up getting in fights with the Groypers about it too, because I somehow have amassed like a whatever. And so I fight with everybody about this, but it's very important to me. And people can call me a shill, whatever. I wear it with pride. But the United Nations thing is rough because I understand why the United Nations was something that was so heavily, it's very heavily written into the Constitution of Israel. And I understand why there would be a desire, and I get in these arguments all the time because people accuse Jews of being globalists. And like, obviously, like I'm very Jewish and very anti-globalist. Like I'm a massive nationalist Jew, but which to me makes total sense. But people freak out about it. So I understand this impulse to have this governing body or this United Nations type thing, the fantasy of it, this like, peace loving sort of utopian idea. And it's so misguided. And it's so obviously easily, like, it all comes down to like how you view the world, right? And weirdly, okay, I'm going to tie this, not to be nuts, but I'm going to tie this back to this directing teacher I was telling you about. He always taught us that if you're going to give somebody a character, you break down their character down to the smallest things, which is like personality traits. Does this person at heart think the world is a good place or a bad place? And my first movie, I explored this a little bit because I was like, I'm going to create two nearly identical characters, and everything about them will simply go from this one has a natural distrust of the world, and this one has a natural trust of the world and a curiosity. I have a natural distrust of the world. I am one of these people who thinks the world is a bad place fundamentally. Nope. I think humans can be okay. I think we can do good things, but I have a fundamental, and I think this is where conservatives and liberals go astray a lot. I think the world is usually a bad place. So my worldview is to protect from that and to, go from it in that angle. Yeah. But I think that the reason that was such an amazing tool for directing that he taught, and that was just like amazing for working with actors and like character development, is because it's real. That is a real, it doesn't matter what religion you are, like whatever. It's like if your fundamental personality, when you come into the world, whether it's how you were raised or whatever it is, but I think most people can tell you, do you and your natural state think that the world is a good place or a bad place? Mm-hmm. And the UN was created by a lot of people who I think thought that the world was a good place and that the bad parts of the world could be mitigated through this globalist stupid thing. And I see it as one of the worst institutions in the world. I hate it.
Yeah. And it comes from the progressive liberal mind, because the progressive liberal mind says that we must be our brother's keeper wherever our brother lives in the world, whether he lives in the ghetto in an American city or whether he lives in Baghdad. We must go save him. Right. It's an oddly like secular Christian idea.
Right. Definitely.
Which classical conservatives don't have. They don't have that idea. Neoconservatives certainly do, but neoconservatives are just progressives in different clothing.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
So and that's all a Democrat. My point is that's all a democratic, progressive, liberal project. The whole thing, building the American empire is what we call it over here on the anti-war side of things. Nice. So Israel, let's talk about that. I haven't actually heard you talk about Israel. Yeah, let's get you in a lot of trouble.
Why did I do that?
And then we'll talk about Mexicans to get you in real trouble. No.
That would be better. I'm very cautious when I speak about Israel because like I'm not as, I just have a lot of respect for the issue, and I'm not going to challenge. I try not to like, there's certain countries and issues that I like.
Well, I'm curious
I'm not saying everybody has to have my opinion, but I have a very, very strong opinion.
I'm just curious about how you came to this. So was your dad a big pro-Israel guy?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, in a goofy way though, I mean, my dad's nuts, right? Like, so it wasn't like he like sat me down at the table and he was like, this is why, like the importance of Israel. It was like, he'd call him up on a Friday. Remember The Big Lebowski?
Sure.
Like Walter is based on
Your
him.
dad's in it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it's uncanny. That's the crazy thing. My brothers and I figured that out years later because he didn't bother to tell us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my brother Ethan figured it out because he's a prosecutor, and for whatever reason he had to Google himself. There was an article that he needed to see about himself or something. And my brothers are older than I am, and he searched Ethan, which is his name, and then our last name, and he found an article of Joel and Ethan Cohen talking about The Big Lebowski, and it mentioned John Milius.
Oh, that's funny.
And the whole time before that, my brothers and I thought it was our favorite movie because we were like, look at the dude,
No.
this is Dad. We were like, can you believe it? It's Dad. He talks like that. He says, the only thing that's wrong is my dad has never worn shorts in his life, but everything else is totally accurate. It's like there's little amalgamations, like there's little weird things like my dad is actually Jewish, but he was at one point married to this woman that sort of made him act more Jewish, and she was like more fanatical about it. And they did get divorced, and he did have to deal with the dog. And it was really nuts. And the dog's fairly accurate. The whole thing, I mean, all of it's accurate. Like when he says, am I wrong? Like I've been saying that my whole life. And then now people think I'm quoting the movie. But like I heard my dad say it, so I'd be like, "Am I wrong?" Like it's a thing. So in that vein, if you can imagine, like I'd be, I'd call my dad. He worked a lot. I didn't spend a ton of time around him because he was always traveling and he's working, So I'd call him like on a Friday. I knew he was home. I'd be like, "Hey, dude, like, what are you doing this weekend? Like, are we going shooting? Like, what's going on?" And I'd call him, and he'd be like, there would have been perhaps a conflict going on in Israel at that moment or something. And he'd be like, "I can't answer the phone right now. I'm watching TV. I'm watching the Israeli tanks crush the Palestinians. It's Friday." And then he'd like, hang up the phone. And I'd be like, "All right, like that, okay, that's what's happening today." I mean, look, the guy loves this shit. Like he loves the history of it. There's nothing my dad likes more than a tank battle. Like, I mean, so it's like, yeah, of course. But I mean, also, if you break it down, it's hard to have a literal, genuine conversation with my dad because everything is so over the top. It's always, it's a little bit of a character, but you're like, "Hey, could we actually talk about why, like, we agree on this thing, or like, this is serious?" Like when I was a kid, it drove me nuts because I'd be like, I'm going to high school in this really preppy, uptight school in LA with like the children of like the produced actors, and like why they sent me there, I don't understand.
Which school? Which school?
Brentwood.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I hated it. I mean, I hated it. And I mean, eventually they sent me to the same boarding school that my dad went to in Colorado, which is actually much better. But anyway, so I would tell him, I'd ask him, like, I tried to get him to parent at one point, and I was like, "I am having a very hard time at school. I do not like these people. They don't like me. They are the children of the people you hate. Like, you don't like agents and the people in Hollywood. You don't like all these executives. Why would you send me to school with their children and expect me to get along with them when they think you're some kind of fascist, insane person?" Yep. And I'm like, why do I have to be an outcast at this stupid institution of like neurotic 15-year-olds that are getting nose jobs for their bat mitzvahs? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, these people are crazy. I mean, they were crazy people. They were neurotic. They were insane. They had like just nuts people. I would never send my kids to school like that. Anyways. And so I would ask him this stuff, and he would give me some analogy about like Vietnam or like surfing. And I'd be like, no, it doesn't help right now. I'm 14. Like, I don't care. But now I love it, obviously. Anyway, so sorry, I'm avoiding the Israel thing.
It's okay.
How did I get into it? I mean, especially, I guess, well, obviously I'm Jewish. And my dad's side of the family is, more into, there's something that happens, especially with Jewish women that don't have to work a lot.
Mm-hmm.
they get like really obsessed with the Holocaust. And like, it's freaking dark. And like, I'd go over to my aunt's house or like my grandmother's or something, and my aunt would like come out and she'd be like, "Oh, I bought you these 3 new books about the Holocaust. Like, I found them at Dutton's." And they were like, I'm like, "Oh, I really don't want to read that all the time." Like, want to think about something else, but like it's like this, it was like this anyway. So I got a lot of history
Okay.
from that side of my family. And, you know, they always reminded me, and I think it was wise to do, that our family had come to the United States in the 1830s
Oh, wow.
from Germany, and that we, you know, like they found it very important to like keep the wisdom of our lineage like alive. And so, I mean, I got into these things. It's something that you learn about. You learn about the displacement of European Jews. And, you know, luckily our family was in the United States like well before 1900 and was able to, my grandfather and great grandfather had a shoe factory that was very successful in the Midwest, and they were able to bring a lot of people over from Europe. But we were kind of different, you know, like there's a lot of families that came in around 1900 and in 20 years around that came through this sort of Ellis Island thing. And they behave more like the caricatures of Jews, like the sort of New York Woody Allen kind of guys. Like we were not very like that. My family was very like Americanized, and like it was more important for them to assimilate. And so like you learn from that, you're like, okay, there has to be a place where Jews don't have to assimilate. And the importance of, you're like, you look at the history over, you know, you have to, over like many, you know, the entire history of the world. And you're like, yes, I am an American first. Like there's a lot of Jews you can ask that question to, and if you had to say, are you an American first or a Jew first? I am an American first for sure. I don't want to have to make that distinction because that's my religion. But if like, I don't know why I would say that, but my gut is that. There's no question. It's not even like a shadow of a question to me. But like, I understand why people with this type of history wouldn't trust other countries to let them stay alive.
Fair enough.
And obviously the history of it all, you know, my ex-boyfriend, who's my business partner on the movie, John Eisenman, who I think, you know, I don't know, he's very good friends with Jack. He was the co-producer with me on Plot Against the President. I mean, his dad was one of the main archaeologists that discovered and brought the Dead Sea Scrolls out of Israel. And I learned a lot from their family about the history and things like, I think that's kind of how and also like, I just think, you know, I really like the IDF's comms messaging. Yeah, like, I mean, our country is like putting out like diversity flags with like pregnant women in flight suits, and like every day the IDF's like tweeting out like their buffest dudes like standing with like a rifle like leaning against a tank. You're like, yeah, that's why I follow this account. Like
I love the point about a place in the world where Jews do not have to assimilate as a powerful point. That's powerful.
Yeah, I think it's I can't think of any other place. So
nope, we forced them to assimilate here. So,
and that's, I mean, look, my family couldn't have been more, I mean, my family was so American. Like they put out their shoe factory back in St. Louis, put out a newsletter celebrating anybody who worked there that had gone to fight in World War II. My grandfather, and my family has massive generations. My grandfather married my grandmother when he was like 50 and then like retired and she was like 20. Like it was like very big generations. My grandfather actually went to Harvard and as a Jew, which is unique, and served in World War I. Like that's how I never met him, but that's how old my grandfather was. Yeah.
OG. Yeah. So immigration, let's talk about that. How did you become passionate about this topic?
Because I grew up in Los Angeles and I watched my hometown decay into a third world hellhole within the span of 10 years.
Okay.
I like the thing I was bitching about before. I didn't want to go to private school. I know that that's a very bratty, elitist thing to whine about. I know that. I even appealed to my parents to let me go to public school, but as counterculture and as edgy as I thought I was in high school, you know, I thought I was the one that hung out on the east side of LA with all the weird artists, and I was so cool. Yeah, I would have got my ass kicked at any of the public schools, and I wouldn't have learned anything. I wouldn't have even got to go to the shitty communist college that I did go to for undergrad. It's almost impossible to go to public school. You can't send your kids to public schools in Los Angeles. it's nothing but gangsters and drug dealers. If you had a daughter, you sure as shit can't send them to public school in Los Angeles. My niece, it's one of the things that really upset me. Look, I was a bad student. I was a bad student until I went to grad school. Then I went to film school. I did really well on testing. I did my own thing outside of school, but I was a terrible student. I tried not to go to class as much as possible. I was very disruptive and I just a bad student. My niece was very bookish, a very nice, shy girl, incredibly intelligent. We're kind of closer in age than like the other, my brother had her very young. So it's a very like weird, like we're closer than a lot of people in our family. And she couldn't go to the private school that I went to. My brother had her when he was like 19 or 20 years old. Like that wasn't going to happen. He was going to law school. And to see the struggle that had to happen to her, if she had had the opportunity that I did to go to a preppy school, she would have had a very different life, and she would have taken to it right away. The fact that she had this shy girl who had a lot of intelligence and a lot of potential, just the trauma of having to go to one of these public schools is really upsetting. And she's not even my daughter, right? She's my niece. Like I can only imagine. Like I love my niece, but I don't know how parents send these kids to these schools in Los Angeles. And it's not like I'm not around that stuff. I went to public school until I went to high school, and the LA Unified System, they bus kids from all over the place. So like, I didn't even have a white friend until I was like 13 and I went to the private school. Like, it's not like I'm some brat from Bel Air who's like never had a diverse group of friends. I always had a diverse group of friends. It's not about that. You cannot expect a public system to thrive when you overwhelm it with non-tax paying. Basically, the politicians in California, it's like they have the utopian idea and they're like, we want to open our arms to everybody. And then they stop thinking about it at that point. They never go, how are we going to fix the overflowing emergency rooms of people who use the emergency rooms as doctors? How are we going to allow our public schools to be useful even to the immigrant children? There were kids even, and when I went to school, that never learned English the whole time they went there. That's not serving anybody. And then you've got the elitists, the people that are making these policies, sending their kids to Brentwood, sending them to Harvard Westlake. And you know what? Now they're doing all this wokeism. Brentwood's in this big scandal about like, they're woke. They didn't do enough for Black Lives Matter or whatever. But you know what? They could solve their diversity problem really easily. They would just have to let the students of Pali come to Brentwood and it would be done. Be extremely diverse. But they don't want to do that. And I, even just driving around, one has a sentiment towards the place where they grew up, right? Like parks that you played at when you were a kid, and you drive by them in the span of 5 years. And they're covered in hypodermic needles, homeless people taking a shit under the swing set, and camps everywhere. I mean, I just left Los Angeles a couple of days ago, and the most disturbing thing is the line. I mean, an entire city blocks of tent cities with American flags on them because they were distributed from the Veterans Administration, because that's where that property is, where all the tent city is in Brentwood, California. And I actually I don't like tent cities for anyone, but the fact that they are in Brentwood now, it's not just Skid Row, it's not just Venice Beach, it's in freaking Brentwood, because I like that, because those people need to see that. That's the result of your stupid immigration policies and what you think this bleeding heart idea is. Like, let it move onto your lawn. Like, open up Nancy Pelosi and all these people's gates and let these people open tent cities and have these miserable experiences in front of them. And I mean, I also think, like I said, I did spend a lot of time on the other side of Los Angeles, right? When I was a kid growing up, I was edgy and angry at everybody around me. So I had to go, I was hanging out with the musicians and artists and whatever other degenerates I found interesting at the time, in the scuzzier parts of Los Angeles. And so I saw this decay happening quickly, and, it really affected me. And I mean, and also the wages, the fact that there's no, the quality of life, like who wants to live in a country like California where you have no middle class. It's just gated communities and then Skid Row.
Mm-hmm.
And I believed that at the time when I was growing up, when I lived in Los Angeles, when I lived in Los Feliz and Silver Lake and whatever. But when I first came to Washington, D.C., and I'd traveled all over the country before, like I spent more time traveling across America than I did in like Europe or anything, like when I was growing up. Like the cool thing for me and my friends was to like go to the South. Like that was like the fun thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got here to Virginia, to Washington, D.C., I went to Alexandria, the little walkway by the river, the port.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody took me for lunch there. I think it was when I was working just on the inaugural committee. And I walked around and I was like, oh, that's why these people don't think there's an immigration problem. There's all these public spaces that are beautiful and they're clean and people can walk with strollers and there's families and they're like, oh, we'll have lunch sitting here looking at the Potomac, dear. And you're like, that no longer exists where I'm from. There is no public middle class life. There's no, everything is covered in graffiti. People can't go places and feel safe with their children. There's no public life in Los Angeles anymore. And it's an amazing state. I mean, California was the most incredible. It was like the hope of the United States. It was, you know, the gold rush and the immense natural resources and the agriculture. I mean, don't get me going on the agriculture. What the, you know, big ag has done as far as destroying California cities with illegal immigration for their, you know, bottom line. And it's not good for local farmers. It's not good for the American economy, and it's not good for wages, and it's not good for the slave labor that they're importing, because that's what they actually want. It's so, to me, it's like to hear Democrats not get the argument against illegal immigration and over legal immigration, you know, like incorrectly thought out legal immigration, is it's like, okay, guys, remember how we fought the Civil War and you guys, like, we all agree slavery is bad for the purpose of agriculture, for being like, oh, I want to keep my cotton profits really low, like really high. So I got to keep my bottom line down. Right. So I'll house this class of people and this is how I'm going to do it. And instead, and I, not to go on a tangent, but I've never actually said this, but I put that connection together at one point when I was working in the White House on the immigration issue. And I was in this meeting, and I'm not going to say anything I'm not supposed to say, but I was in this meeting and we were discussing this potential immigration bill. And the stakeholders of the ag industry, which is, again, another, it's close to the CIA of how much I hate them.
Wow, yeah.
So the stakeholders of the ag industry were sitting around this big table, and we were, you know, obviously I was not participating. I'm backbenching. There were discussions being had. I won't get into what they were, but all I will tell you is that the descriptions of the people themselves, the men that were sitting in these chairs, not a single one of them under like 300 pounds, whiter than paper. Every single one of them. It was like something out of a bad Civil War drama where they were literally sitting there and they were like, well, if we don't get those visas, I mean, our visa program, we can't compete, like, because all those other people, they'll be bringing in illegal immigrants and we can't have, you know, we can't miss out on our temporary visas. We can't do permanent e-verify. They were like, because our neighbors don't do e-verify. So while we can't do it, and I was like, holy shit, this is the antebellum South. Like, this is, and it just replaced. And I'm like, and I'm the one sitting here arguing, and like liberals are calling me a fascist Nazi because they're like, you don't like the illegal immigrants. And I'm like, no, I just don't want to live in a world where there's like a slave labor class. Like, I think that's weird. It makes me uncomfortable. Like,
you know who agrees with you? Bernie Sanders.
I know. And that's why the Bernie bots, the Bernie bros came over in massive numbers in 2016. All they had to do was disavow and they were allowed to join us.
So, you know, that was, as you were talking, that was really fascinating. And as you were talking, something came to light for me, I think, which is that the immigration debate, generally speaking, is held on the macro level, right? So we look at aggregate numbers. We have an argument about whether like the amount of, cheap labor will offset whatever losses there are for for workers in this country, competing with the cheap labor. And I'm basically convinced on the macro level for for immigration. But what is missed is the local level, the micro level, what it actually, how people actually experience mass immigration in their towns like Los Angeles, right?
And not just Los Angeles. I mean, if you're curious, listen to how Victor Davis Hanson describes his county. And I mean, he's an old guy. He's seen some things.
He's like in Bakersfield, right?
He's near Bakersfield. Yeah. He's actually near Nunez's district. So
right.
He's in that California ag, that Central Valley.
Yeah.
Listen to what he says about it. It's stunning.
Yeah. Right. And, we don't hear enough from people who have actually lost jobs or have had it hard, who've had a difficult time competing for jobs with immigrants. We don't talk about people who live in these places where there are lots of homeless people, many of whom are now immigrants in California. By the way, I was once in Humboldt County, of all places, and if you've been there recently, it is like full of homeless people. There's homeless people all over the streets up there. It used to be this glorious hippie paradise.
Right.
Now there's homeless people even there way up in the woods in Northern California. And a bunch of them were from India. There were homeless people who were crackheads and probably schizophrenic also from India with Indian accents. So you have a point.
I mean, and it's who says this well, and I don't know how you argue with this, is actually Scott Adams. And he says, look, the issue with immigration is we're not even at the point of having the national conversation of what kind of immigration policy should we have, because unless you have control of the borders, you as a country are not deciding. Mm-hmm. So the idea that there's like a left-wing idea of what our immigration policy it should be and the right-wing idea, we're not even there yet, because I know what my preferred idea is. We talked about this. I had the pleasure of working with like some of the absolute greatest minds behind this, and legal minds on this issue, and looking at the different immigration systems in countries that have been recession-proof for a long time, like Australia and New Zealand and things like that. But forget that, because unless you have a control on your border, the people who are deciding what your immigration policy is are the people who are coming through, and Mexico is in charge of our immigration policy. El Salvador, Guatemala, that's who's in charge of our immigration policy. So I would even argue, fine, I'll put aside my perfect idea of what an immigration policy should look like. Can we at least just get to the point where the United States is deciding? Fine, like you want to be like the Biden administration, like secure the border, and then you pick the immigrants that you like and you want to come in. They can all be, queer, transgender, BIPOCs, fine, whatever, just like pick, like, can we just be in charge at least? Like chaos is usually not the better policy. Like, I'm just like, can we at least go there? You know what I mean?
That's a strong argument. Yeah. Let's talk one more issue and then I'll let you go. Which, and I know it's an issue that's near to your heart, near and dear to your heart. Guns, Second Amendment.
Okay.
You used to, so I'm a Californian also, born and raised here, but I was born and raised in Berkeley. So I did not see a gun until I was, 12, 13 years old. And I saw one my entire childhood, one gun. Never touched a gun, certainly never shot a gun. You had a very different experience because your dad was a big fan of guns, right?
Yeah, I had a different experience. I love that about my parents, and it is how I got into politics. It was the first issue that I ever understood. It was, my parents are actually not terribly like political, especially my mother. I mean, they are not. I mean, my dad these days, he watches the news all the time. He's quite older, and it's just like what he does.
Right.
But he still goes shooting with my mom, even though they've been divorced for 30 years, and it is so contentious. And I have no idea how they haven't shot each other yet, but it's not happened so far. It is. I gotta look. I feel very comfortable around guns. I've been around them my whole life. These days, like, look, my dad is getting really old. My mom is getting really old. We go shooting a lot, and it is a little bit nerve-wracking at the end of each day. I was just like, all right. I gotta stop doing this at some point. Like, one of these days, we got to cut this activity off. But no. I'm most. It's fine. We know how to do it. But no. I appreciate that they did that. It was the first issue that it was the only political issue they really stuck in my head. They didn't tell me they didn't care. They didn't watch politics all the time. Like my dad, like I said, had great disdain for a lot of people on the right, as well as the left. But what they made me understand was that the Second Amendment was this uniquely American thing, and that all of the other amendments were tied to it. And it was the most important thing in our life. And there were two things that they really ever beat into my head, which is don't put your name on any lists. Don't get on political lists. I don't know that I accomplished that, but there was this thing like when we'd walk out of the market and there'd be some like volunteer with like a thing, and they'd be like, will you sign our petition? My mom would be like, never, ever do that. Never get associated with something you don't know what it is. And like, just don't do it. Just no. And I don't know. That kind of stuck with me, but then now here I am. I'm like in the Trump administration and talk about it all the time. But the other thing was the gun thing. And I mean, they really, really, I mean, my dad put that in Red Dawn a lot. Like there's always a gun. I mean, my dad's obsessed with guns. Like that's like his thing. Like that's what he collected. I learned to appreciate them as pieces of art in some ways, because my dad collected these very rare Italian shotguns that are really incredible things. It's like a Ferrari, right? It's like the Ferrari of guns. So I used to not like that. I used to be like, why couldn't my dad get things that were like cool and like useful to me as like a young flashy person? But I don't care about that anymore. I think the guns are very cool. And I think I didn't have any fear of them, because like the thing that they really beat in my head was like, and I think most gun owning families do this, or at least they should, is like gun safety. And I mean, like as soon as I could read, I was taught like the NRA has these classes and this pamphlets, these information for kids, and teaches them gun safety, even if you are not going to be a house that has a gun, right? Like even if you choose a home that doesn't have guns in it, you never know what kind of house your kids are going to go to. And if those people's parents are going to maintain proper gun safety and keep their guns locked up in safes and out of the reach of children and So it's like, it was very important to us to be like trained what to do if you're ever in a room with somebody and there's a gun and you don't know if it's loaded or whatever. And like, I'm not going to get into how, but like certainly when I was a lot older, there's been one or two times where that's been pretty useful information. And I don't think it's what the NRA child's pamphlet had in mind of the kind of rooms that I walked into where there might have been loaded guns. But anyway, still useful. But it's like, I don't know. It was like the same way they taught me how to swim by throwing me in the pool before I could walk or talk. And children learn that they can float and then they don't panic. And so it's not exactly the modern style of parenting, but this is how my parents were. My dad threw me in the ocean. Like, I think I'm even like 3, like, and my brothers already put me on the surfboard, like out in the thing. And you just figure that the child will come back. Like, this is like how people were. I don't know. But the gun thing, I had a lot of respect for it. And, you have to, I would do the same thing. I would teach children that, but I learned how to actually shoot, I think when I was like 7 or 8, which in most parts of the country is normal. Yeah. Otherwise, like I like it. I like shooting. I mean, you can psychoanalyze it, but like if I wanted to spend any time with my dad, there were only 2 places he went, and it was the shooting range and the cigar club afterwards. I still smoke cigarettes and I still shoot guns. So this is sort of what happened.
Your dad was not ashamed of his masculinity, was he?
No. And it's actually funny in my family, we tease him about this a lot because, he has that's his like aura, right? Like people are like, oh my God, your dad is he's like such a tough guy. And he's like, wow, like he has all this, like they think he is his movies. And I have to explain to them like, yeah, like I was raised by the values of Conan the Barbarian. I was raised by the values in those movies. Okay. That is not necessarily at all how he behaves or he acts. He's been married and divorced many times. And I think people would be surprised at how such a masculine tough guy is so absolutely easily manipulated by women. But I'll try to keep the mystique alive and not give him too hard of a time. But yeah, no, and I like that. I think that's important. My mother was weirdly, she was an actress, so she was fairly feminine in that way, but really she's actually quite she's very different than I am, where she doesn't like girly things. Like she goes shooting all the time with my dad and like is into cars and stuff like that, and like can't understand why I like jewelry and clothes and the other things like that. So they're both a little bit unique.
Yeah. So the political establishment hates Trump, I think because of his views on NATO and foreign policy and regime change.
Funnily, which is weird because we got NATO more funded than any president in recent history.
I know, right? I know, but he said stuff about NATO that you're not supposed to say that scared them, right?
Like that it's obsolete.
And he's not interested in big regime change wars and nation building anymore. So that was a threat to them existentially, and I think that's why they went hammer and tong on him. But the masses, the people who watch CNN who were opposed to Trump, I think they hated him and continue to hate him because of his masculinity, because he's unashamed of it, because he's unabashed about it, because he presents it the way that most American men do present this masculinity. It's very normal coming from American, but when it's the president, we can't handle it. I'm struck that there's a there's a
total connection. Okay, wait, I have to tell you one thing really fast. You just reminded me. So my favorite moment of the whole Trump presidency, I figured out what it is. And I was at State Department when it happened, and I just remember the joy and the celebration in my heart when it happened, and like the entire room was like horrified. And it was the moment that the president shoved the Montenegrin president out of the way at NATO, and then just stood there and went like this. And I was like, oh my God, cut that video, put it out on everything. I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Holy shit, that was amazing. What a boss. And I'm sitting with a room full of, I'm in the NATO, office, like they're freaking out. They were just like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, this is amazing. Anyway, the reason you say that's funny. Things like NATO, being a masculine boss, unabashedly, it all came together in that moment. I totally think you're right. And that room was it. Me going, yay, oh my God, that was the coolest thing ever. I love my president. To the rest of the room being like, oh my God, this is an international crisis. And I mean, look at it now. Like those same people that were pulling their hair out about the international crisis of like shoving the Montenegrin president aside, who should have known better, as they're watching Afghanistan. And by the way, State Department officials leaving hundreds of Americans behind in hostile territory. And I want to tell these people, like, it's not that I hate your stupid programs, because I do. I don't like your, lesbian puppet shows for CVE. All of that shit is total horseshit, and you guys are disgusting for wasting and burning hardworking Americans' money. And I will always resent that of you. Not just that, but your core mission. The only reason this big, stupid building exists is to never leave Americans in harm's way. And you fucked up. You did it. You lost the one job, and there's millions of people that work in this stupid institution, and you couldn't figure out how to do that right. And over here, you're doing, fucking bead making for economic development in Botswana, and you can't get the Americans out, like focus, Anyways, that makes me furious. But on the Trump dad thing, I've talked about this before, and it's weird, and like people can make fun of me, but yeah, it probably is why I still love the president. Like I have like a poster of the guy. I've also got Red Dawn right there. Like I could see psychoanalysts going about that quite easily. Like, yes, the way that I learned to accept and to celebrate my strange dad, even with certain failings behind the scenes, for me to step back and see the bigger picture and be like, wow, he's a genius. Like, I don't need him to show up at my T-ball game and be this kind of like Hallmark sort of dorky version of a dad that they're always telling you if you don't have, and you have a bad dad and all this crap. There were very, very difficult things I had to go through with my dad, like unbelievable, insane things with like legal shit and these marriages and health stuff. Like I had to basically spend 5 years of my life like rescuing him out of like situations he got himself into, all kinds of crazy stuff. But I learned how to kind of be like, okay, those are the behind the scenes things that are difficult, but on the whole, you are blessed to have a genius as a dad. It's not that bad. Like, it's like, don't ask of him what you're not going to get. Like, accept him for what it is and go from that. And that sort of same ability to kind of, I get lost in the anger towards failings that happened in the administration, decisions, certainly like the personnel shit, which makes me insane and like has to get fixed. But like all of those, there were so many decisions that frustrated me. And I mean, a lot of people from the administration talk about this. Darren Beatty talks about it. I mean, a lot of people talk because, you know, like you said, it was a movement. This was, we were supposed to represent other people. It wasn't about us. It was about the regular Americans who couldn't come work in DC. We were supposed to execute for them.
Right.
And having that stunted by bad people that were hired by the president and his people that, you know, look, it's very frustrating. It's so frustrating that people sometimes ask me, like, how can you still be so supportive? And I say it's the same thing because it's a bigger picture. It's like, like that was really difficult. The hard things in my life for those 4 years that we worked in that administration, most of the difficult things that I had to do were somehow at the hand of some asshole that got hired by these people, or some decision that like accidentally got made or purposely got made or whatever. Like, and most of the like really pro MAGA people in the admin say the exact same thing. And I still have to be like, yeah, I don't care because the big picture is the dude's a genius overall, very stable genius. And is the movement leader for this movement, and this movement is the same. It represents all of those people, and I'm behind it. I'm still behind it. Like it doesn't matter. Like I'm a full Kool-Aid sipping member. Like if we have to drink the Kool-Aid, I'll drink it. It's fine. I mean,
your eyes are very wide open, though, I have to say. Very last question, which maybe a lot of people have been waiting for, and I've never heard anyone ask this question of anyone in the Trump administration, which is sort of shocking, since all we do as a country is obsess about Trump as a personality. What is Donald Trump like, Amanda?
Well, I mean, I don't know that well. I like the administration's quite large, and I wasn't that important. Like, I wasn't in the Oval, like having done Cokes with him. I also, I mean, he's like, I've been in the same room, and I'm trying not to sound like like I'm describing like a Rolling Stones concert or something, but I mean, he's like so larger than life, and I'm so fond of him, and he's so cool that like, I just am like, dude is a boss. He's just so cool. He's so casual, and he's so like real. It's very like real. I did not spend very much time. Like I never had like a face-to-face meeting with him where he was like, Amanda, what do you think about this? Like that never happened. I wish, but maybe next time. But you know, I specifically, not that anyone was inviting me into Oval Office meetings, but I got a good lesson early on that from somebody that worked in Washington for a long time. And they said, you know, the White House is a really hard place to work. And it's a lot of people fighting each other to get closer to the sun. And it's the best way to get yourself axed and to get in fights that'll waste your time. If you really care about the policies that you're here to change and you really care about what you're doing, just put your head down and do that, and don't constantly try to get in front of bigger and bigger principles. And I found that I was able to accomplish a lot more sort of scurrying around under the planks. And I like that better. I don't like being tied to like one place or thing. I also, like I said, I spent 6 months at the White House, and I was not trying to extend my detail. I describe it like I would much rather be stabbed in the front by my enemies than stabbed in the back by my friends. And it was weird because I had a lot of friends, and we all did. I mean, everybody was like a comrade, if you will. when you're in the bigger agencies and, and you're calling back to the mothership, like the White House, and you're like, hey man, like, how do we get this done? Like, can I help you do this? Like, we're all on the same team. The moment you go to the White House, there's a lot of, people are really high strung and really like it. By year 3, I think when I was over there, like, yeah, I was like, oh, like I thought these people were my friends, but once you get in the same environment, they're all competing to be the number one guy at that issue. So even though you might agree with them ideologically and everybody's on the same page, they're on this like upward trajectory towards the sun.
Right.
And you're like, oh, whoa, this is a competition TV show now.
Yeah,
like
right.
wasn't it better last week when I worked in the agency and we were doing things and like we were getting things done, and like you didn't think I was your competition and like weren't trying to get me fired every day. So I was like, yeah, this sucks. I'm going to go back to, I never thought I'd say this, but I was like, I'm going back to State Department. Like, I'm good. Like, I am good on working in this building. Like, I'm out. So it's a little weird.
You wanted to stick and move. You didn't want to stick around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Great. Well, this has been fun, and everyone needs to go watch your movie.
Thank you.
Even if you hate Donald Trump and are sure that Vladimir Putin runs the country because of Donald Trump, you should still go watch this movie. I think there's no better argument on that side of the issue that I've seen. It's very impressive and very sober, very analytical, rational. Really, it is partisan, of course, but not in a way that undercuts its credibility at all. And
hyperbolic. That was the word I was thinking.
Hyperbolic. Yeah.
Hyperbolic.
Certainly not that. Yeah. Certainly not that. Amanda, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, please have all your listeners go check out the movie. It's still on Amazon, iTunes, and Rockfin. If you're not into giving money to either Apple or Amazon, Rockfin, I think, takes Bitcoin. Anyway, but yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I'm so glad that you liked it. And I really respect your show. And it's been very lovely to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.